this issue coming up with Comcast and Hulu. And most people are pretty well aware of it. We've been talking about this for weeks, if not months, at this point on this channel.
We're talking about $15 to $25 billion that the mouse needs to show.
Yeah, and the key is, Pro, of course, that range. We don't know what the final figure is yet, and that's something to very strongly bear in mind. We've talked about this before. We've talked about this with Andrew Esquire at Legal Mindset. He's got a link for the show tonight as well. I'm sure he's probably not up yet, given the time zone variance. But that being said, is that, Comcast has the put, Disney has the call. There's a lot of things that could play into this. But as this came up, there were some rumors that came out this week about, well, Disney might sell assets that they have to cover whatever the purchase price of this deal may wind up being. And I think we're a long ways off from seeing what that number is. It's possible that we get some type of agreement between Disney and Comcast prior to January 1st. I think that's entirely possible. I think it's also entirely possible that this thing gets dragged out into arbitration, if not outright court, for some time. As we've stated before, Disney's going to want to pay as close to the minimum value, which is about $9 billion, to acquire the remaining stake of Hulu. Comcast, of course, has already signaled they want 3 times that amount. They want, not $9 billion, they want $27 billion. They're going to have to wind up meeting somewhere in the middle. This is just bargaining. Now, the question then becomes, are the rumors that Disney would sell major assets, particularly ones that seem so incredibly, inexorably intertwined in the Disney corporate infrastructure as a Star Wars is, what is the viability of that actually happening, right? Would Disney actually sell a park or a massive IP? And I know there have been examples brought up in the past, but I want to talk about, there are some major differences between the Power Rangers and Star Wars. And Script, I'm going to throw it at you because I know we kind of had this discussion Friday with Tom and Andre on Midnight's Edge. So do you want to talk about some of the differences of how Lucasfilm versus something like the Power Rangers is, and what your opinion is on the veracity of a claim that they would sell an asset like this?
Well, the fact of the matter is that Bob Iger thought he learned when he took over Disney in, I believe it was 2005, if I'm not mistaken. And 4 years later, he had to sell Power Rangers because his company had kind of driven it into the ground. And the fortunate thing is the way he was able to sell it is the fact that it wasn't an integrated property into the Disney parks. You could see cast members dressed up as Power Rangers at their MGM studios and whatnot. They had stuff through Disney XD, but it was nowhere near as well integrated with regards to the way Galaxy's Edge is integrated into Disney World and Disneyland, hotels, what have you. There was never
there wasn't an entire Power Rangers 14-acre expansion on both coasts.
Exactly. Like it wasn't there. Eisner at the time had no interest in going beyond that. To them, when they looked at it, they didn't feel that Power Ranger fans wanted to go visit the command center or Rita Repulsa's palace or whatever it was at the time. They were just like, no, all we need is the cartoons, cast members dressed around with them, get their photos, get the autographs, and move on. That's all we need in the parks. And that was their saving grace at that point. But Iger felt like, oh, we screwed up with Power Rangers. We didn't make money out. We had to sell it back. We can't do that with any of the other properties we do. What we should do is, now that we've learned the mistakes of how not to drive a franchise into the ground, which is my speculation of what Iger was thinking, completely oblivious to the irony that would prove to be true in this coming years, is that, oh, well, we are in this hook, line, and sinker. We are going to integrate Star Wars and Marvel into our streaming platforms, into our parks as much we can. We're going to wait out the Marvel contract with Universal, if that's the case, before we start building Marvel things in here. And we're just going to do what we can for Star Wars to make people understand that Star Wars and Disney are now married until death do they part type of deal.
It's sort of that script. See if this imagery is correct. I've been trying to figure out how to explain it for people. The best way I know to explain it is it's like 50 different conjoined twins all connected together. And you start to try to untangle here, and there are issues there. And it's just this massive problem because you have every single show on Disney Plus that's related to Star Wars has its own contracts, and those contracts are connected with it being on Disney Plus, and they probably don't have terminating clauses anytime soon, and
Isn't
they're
it more
always
like a
intended to
human
be there.
centipede? Isn't that a little bit better?
Maybe.
Well, you don't want to. You want to eat the vanilla paste, right?
Let's
the
not
South
have
Park
our
reference.
audience throw up in the sight of
Well,
that.
I'm just saying it kind of is more so than the twins thing. I mean, because one feeds into the other,
Well, it
feeds
could
into
be
the
like
other.
quadruplets born at the same
Sorry, I
time, and their
derailed,
umbilical
but-
cords are all tangled, and we can't separate them from the mother.
That's just
No,
as
the
disturbing.
The idea is simply that when you say they're going to sell Star Wars, that sounds like they're going to sell one thing. What it actually means is that they would sell 1,000 things that have 1,000 different contracts that have all of these different interconnecting points, and you would need an army of attorneys to, on the receiving end to just do this.
To untangle it, yes. And in fact, the expense of attorneys alone would probably not even make it a worthwhile endeavor to explore. Possibly.
Yeah.
It all depends
curious.
on, but the thing is, again, Disney and no studio really runs like a normal business. They do things that make a lot of regular business people, a lot of people at the stock market scratch their heads and go, what the heck is this? Now we got to reassess and readjust everything because they pulled this very unorthodox maneuver. But that being said, Disney has integrated Star Wars so deeply into their brand and into their infrastructure that trying to get that out would take maybe 5 to 10 years just in sorting, because again, they still have to say, okay, well, so hypothetically, they sell Lucasfilm back to somebody. Well, we've got a big piece of property at our parks that is essentially Lucasfilm property that if we use it, we'd have to give the owners a cut. Essentially, we have to lease it back to them. That means more money at a loss for us. We would have to either deconstruct it or completely overhaul it in a way where they repaint it. They remove the Millennium Falcon. They put whatever else general science fiction crap that Disney has access to in there.
And we know, Script, that the cost of those two expansions, each one of them is supposed to cost about $1 billion. In actuality, it's $1.4 billion. So to redo them, you're talking about close to $2 billion just to completely redo everything thematically. You can leave the rock work, but you can't leave much else.
Well, the stuff that they could do, they could repaint it. They could cover up anything that would be Star Wars-esque and just call it like Industrial City or something. Like, again, you have to realize how desperate, scared, and lazy a theme park could be when it comes to that. In fact, Paramount has a great history of this. They used to own some Six Flags and Wonderland stuff that had their name to it, and they sold it off. Up here in Canada, we had Paramount Canada's Wonderland, and it had Star Trek and Wayne's World and Top Gun and all that stuff. And when they sold their part in it, they had to take those brandings off and remove them. And it was kind of expensive, but they did it in the most cheapest of ways possible to keep it in there. The roller coaster Top Gun was still there. They just changed it to like Flight Command or something.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the laziest approach that Walt Disney Company could possibly do if it comes to that point.
The only problem is there are no roller coasters to retheme. You've got a giant video game simulator that's all based around the Millennium Falcon. That's not something that you just paint over. You're going to have to completely redo it and hire
the
somebody else.
Interior would have to be redone. Yep. And
then Rise of the Resistance is itself probably a $600 to $700 million experience that is distinctly Star Wars from top to bottom.
The park things aside, because like we have an example there of how difficult those things can be with Marvel, right? Because even though they bought Marvel, there was still the problem with Universal having the park rights to the characters. So on the one coast, they can't have Marvel in the parks, right? But they can on the other one. And again, that's a convoluted mess there. But another example of this is like, look at how the Muppets worked out. I think the only reason they were able to carve the Muppets out of the Henson Company and sell them the way they did is because, as far as I know, like 90% of the contracts and stuff they had left over for the Muppets were all through Disney anyway. So it just managed to work out that they didn't have as much red tape to probably go through. But can you imagine what it would have been like for, say, if like Sony or Universal had tried to buy the Muppets with all the licenses going through Disney? That would have been a nightmare for them, which is basically what you're saying on the other side of it. And I can see that. Like, why would they turn around and try? It would be like trying to remove, a cancer from inside cancer at this point when you're trying to get rid of Star Wars from Lucasfilm, because it's so ingrained in Lucasfilm and in Disney now throughout the parks and every other avenue, and whatever other contracts they still have going on at the end of the day, it makes no sense.
Well, let's just play that out with an easy one. Okay, so let's just take one entity, and we know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these. But let's play one out and see how this goes. So let's say that you want to take Kenobi, and you want to buy it. Okay, just Kenobi. Almost certainly there are contracts associated with Kenobi that are distinctly linking it to Disney Plus and probably have no terminating clause for its existence on Disney Plus, or if it does, it goes out decades. And then the actors and the writers and the directors, et cetera, and this is all part of the writer's strike we're going through right now, trying to get more money off of streaming successes, but they probably have milestone connections to the service as well. And those would then become public, which would then open up Disney to scrutiny, because we would, whatever company would find out exactly how it's performed. But then let's say that you're an individual and you want to buy Kenobi. Well, almost certainly the contract requires that people that it remain on streaming and that people be rewarded based on its streaming, or else they're compensated in some way. If you're an individual buying Star Wars, just buying Kenobi, you don't have a streaming service to put it on. So what do you do then when you cannot fulfill the contract that you're purchasing? And that's just one example.
You would end up having to license it back to Disney Plus, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which would then diminish the entire reason for you purchasing it to zero.
That's just it.
That's the other part too. You also might have an issue with regards to distribution. So if you would buy Lucasfilm in general, well, they have now a solid contract with Buena Vista, which is Disney's distribution wing, which means that if you buy Lucasfilm, you buy that contract. And if you want to get someone else to distribute it, you're going to have to negotiate that other distributor to buy out the Buena Vista part of that contract. Same thing with when it comes to streaming services. If you don't want to put it on Disney, but you want to put it on another streaming service, you yourself can't afford to do that. You have to get another streaming service to buy that out, to put it on theirs, which means that you're getting a net zero return most likely. Because whatever money you would have made on the other streaming services has gone to Disney to pay for them to broadcast it on another streaming service.
And all of
that's just the way it is. It's a shell game of sorts where the owner ends up getting nothing other than the ownership of the property, and will probably have to wait many, many years before they're able to actually do something of it for themselves with the existing contact.
And the problem with that, of course, is script is that if that is the case, and you bring up an excellent point, it's exactly what I was going to bring up, is that if Disney were to strike a deal, they have one of two choices, is that they would have to pay substantial licensing fees back to the buyer, which of course is going to diminish their return from the sale over say 10 years.
Okay. Hold right there, Valiant. Hold on that point, because folks don't understand what you're talking about is the theme parks, right? Mm-hmm. So essentially, you're buying a franchise that you can't put anywhere in a new theme park. So reduce that off the initial buy, the initial value that Disney found in it, and then take off all the streaming shows, right? Take those off as well. So that's what we're talking about.
Or have to pay a fee. Well, that's what I was going to say. Either they have to pay a fee back to Disney, Disney would have to pay a fee to the new owner, which would enhance the sale price potentially in that theoretical example. But Disney has to pay it back over 10 years, which reduces the value of the sale, or Disney sells it to a potential buyer and then works into the contract, as I think Script was alluding to where, well, we get the first so many years where we're not going to pay any fees back to you. Well, that reduces the value to the potential buyer, meaning they're going to pay a lot less for it. And in which case, if that happens, it makes no sense for Disney to sell it because they're not going to get much anything for it. So that's what I'm saying, is that when you look at it from that perspective, there's no way to make a value proposition for this either way, because of how intertwined it's become with the Disney infrastructure.
Well, think of it this way. Right now, Disney Plus is paying Disney parent to license Star Wars. So
everything else.
So if someone else buys Star Wars, then Disney Plus is no longer paying Disney parent. They're paying them, which means that Disney is now losing that money. So it's not in their interest. So the other thing being is that they either break the contract and take the potential hit of future earnings and let someone else take it off to another streaming services, which is, again, might allow them to increase the value of the sale to themselves, but it loses all the potential stuff. And then they have to take that up with the board and all the stockholders as to why they're losing all this potential stuff and why they've lost their contracts with these long-term contracts that were put in place with this franchise. or they bite the bullet and they be like, okay, we are still the distributors of Star Wars for X amount of years, and unfortunately, the money that we'd be paying ourselves are now going to the new owner, which just makes that sale, which basically would probably allow them to pay back or pay off a significant portion of what they used to buy that anyway. So theoretically, let's say they did manage to sell Lucasfilm to George Lucas for $4 billion, and all the license deals that they had through Disney Plus and the parks and whatnot would say over in 5 or 6 years, Disney would end up having to pay $2 billion to Lucas in those licensing, which means that George Lucas got it back essentially for half the price of what he sold it for.
And then the stock crashes because it looks like they took one of their major franchises, one of their tentpole franchises, 5 of which I guess they probably have, and diminished it by half. So then the investors finally have something objective to look at and go, holy crap.
I don't know if it would crash, but definitely drop them around 10 to 20 points.
Well, that's what I was going to say. And so if Disney is valued at what, 170 billion,
about 170 billion in market cap, if that's what you're referring to.
So if you drop, let's say it drops 12%, where's it put it at? That would put it at, I'm trying to run the math.
Well, it's going to be around 140.
140, 150-ish.
Here's the thing, and that's another point that I was
20 billion,
bring up
right?
later.
Yeah.
That's
so
another point.
So 20 billion damage to Disney if they do that, and they made 2 billion
potentially.
Yay!
Well, and that's just it. If you sell a major IP, and I alluded to this earlier with the whole, what would the investor reaction be, right? Disney turns around, if they sell Marvel, they sell Star Wars, they sell Lucasfilm, and of course, what do they sell when they sell Lucasfilm? Right? Are we talking about the whole kit and caboodle? Why would Disney sell off things like ILM and Skywalker Sound? That would make no sense. Those things are cash machines. That's one of the few parts of Lucasfilm that do really work well from a fiscal perspective. They make money there because they don't just service Disney; they service other studios as well. So that, I mean, how would you divvy that out, right? You're talking about selling the actual IPs and not necessarily the whole Lucasfilm enterprise. What happens to investor confidence? When
ILM they could like sell.
They could.
ILM is independent enough, even though it's associated with Lucasfilm, it is independent enough for them to possibly sever without much of a recourse.
Right, but why would they?
Oh no, exactly. Why would they? Because they're essentially again, all their effects are done at cost for them when they own ILM.
Yeah, effectively so. And that's just it. Is what happens to the stock price? What happens to the signal to the investors when they go, wait a minute, Disney is selling major assets. They're selling a theme park. They're selling a Marvel. They're selling Star Wars. Something must really be wrong. Investor confidence gets shaken, and you're going to see it reflected almost instantly in the market reaction. You're going to see there's going to be a sell-off, which then punishes Disney. So anything they could have effectively gotten from the sale, they lose in market cap, which is a ding against the balance sheet, which is a ding against the financials of the company. There's kind of a no-win scenario. It's a bit of a Kobayashi Maru for Disney in that case. So.